When Thomas Massie mentioned the Epstein plea agreement on the floor of Congress, he talked about how the documents were missing from the recent files in the DOJ drop. But what if they weren't missing? What if they were just really hard to find? And what if we found them?
So I'm in the Ed McMahon role this time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's amazing.
This last couple of weeks has been a really interesting time period for me because, I mean, I feel like this is the third time I've fallen down a complete and total, I don't even want to call it a rabbit hole. I don't know. I've gone through the looking glass with the Epstein files for maybe the third or fourth time now. And every time something else, like some other thread, it's like I need an Ariadne like holding the thread because I feel like maybe there's a Minotaur at the center of this, or maybe there's like 50 Minotaurs. Like, I don't know. So
Yeah.
this time, I don't remember why I started revisiting this concept, but I think you'll remember I emailed you right when those documents came out about Alex Acosta, the former Secretary of Labor in Trump's first term, who was the U.S. attorney who gave Epstein that sweetheart plea deal in 2007, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, there's a lot of documents here that are internal communications between Acosta and his team. This all seems like stuff maybe people haven't had access to before.
Mm-hmm.
But I just sort of put that on hold and then only revisited it this past week or two. And when I did, it just exploded in my face.
You know, what's
And
crazy about this is this sweetheart deal, as it's now always called,
yeah,
even though it was, 2019 when we all started thinking about this stuff, or even earlier. I thought all the wires had been pulled out of that deal, that we knew every single thing there was to know about it, and that it was plenty dirty as we understood it. But it's worse than we knew. And
right, because
you
there are
hit a
multiple
smoking gun in
levels
this.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are multiple levels of this deal. And because that deal only happened at the federal level, the beginning of that investigation started in 2005. And it started in Palm Beach in Florida. And the cops in Palm Beach were tipped off as to there were multiple children going to his house and receiving money for sexual massages. And so as they continued to examine this, they found more and more and more girls who had been doing this. And so when the cops turned the case over, they initially turned it over to the Palm Beach State Attorney, whose name was Barry Krischer. And that's going to become really important.
Yes.
And Krischer initially, apparently, was very gung ho. He was like, oh my God, we got to stop this guy. This is terrible. And then as things progressed, as the case progressed, the police chief at the time and the chief detective just saw his affect change. And they don't really know why. It just suddenly became, oh, actually, like I don't know, like maybe we don't want to push this quite so hard. And they soft pedaled it, they slow walked it. There was also the line prosecutor under Krischer who was dealing with it was named Lana Belalavec.
Mm-hmm.
And she is the one who was involved in their state office of child exploitation. That's
Mm-hmm.
like who she was. And she will also become important. But they slow walked it for so long that what the police chief and the lead detective were like, we've just got to go over his head because he's not prosecuting this case.
Right.
And so they went to the FBI, and that alone is almost unheard of. Like, you don't get a police chief of a jurisdiction like just skipping over the state like attorney's office because they're
Right.
not doing their due diligence on prosecuting somebody. But that's when the feds actually get involved, and they start to create their own case through the FBI. And the FBI comes out with many more victims than the Palm Beach police had had. So at the time when the initial indictment was drafted, there were 37 victims that they had identified and talked to. What's interesting to me is that they were drafting this indictment, but that from the get-go, like back to 2005, it was clear that Epstein was getting tipped off by somebody from inside. Likely it was inside of the state attorney's office, now knowing what we know later. But when the cops initially raided his house in Palm Beach, he had removed almost all of the surveillance system, like the actual hard drives and
Hmm.
all of the hard drives to his desktop computers, and the monitors and everything were still there, but like all of the data was gone.
Hmm.
And so it was clear because there was a detective who had been over to his house previously to do recon and had seen the actual hard drives there before,
Hmm.
that he had removed it prior to the raid. So as they're building this indictment, both in the FBI, the Fed level, and then the sort of dormant one at the state level, he's starting to assemble a defense team. So this
Hmm.
is before charges have ever been filed.
Hmm.
And he assembles a defense team that the Miami Herald would later call an armada. And it literally is. It's like the battleships of the legal profession.
Hmm.
There is everybody from Alan Dershowitz, who is a Harvard law professor. He ends up hiring Kenneth Starr, who is, an ex Solicitor General of the U.S., who had been the prosecutor for the Whitewater scandal and Clinton, and he was an ex judge. There's like several like prominent defense attorneys from locally and in New York. I mean, he literally had, I think he had like at least 7 attorneys by the
Hmm.
end of this, who were just immediately putting tons of pressure on every aspect of this. But what then we start to get into like, okay, well, what's different this time with the way that these files were dropped? What do the files tell us that we didn't know before? And it tells us because we have internal communications now between the feds.
Hmm.
We have some from the state, but we have more from the feds. And then we also have the contemporaneous Epstein side of things. So him and his lawyers talking
Hmm.
and putting all of that together into a picture now just builds a much more interesting, convoluted, nuanced portrait of what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
So Epstein is the one putting words in his lawyers' mouths about
Yeah.
how they are to attack these victims, how they are to paint them as, quote, prostitutes
Hmm.
to the prosecutors,
Hmm.
how, like, he's the one who's paying for private investigators to tail them, to do Oppo research on them, to come up with, ways of discrediting all of them. But when I read through, there's a huge, long email that Epstein wrote to himself. And as you know, he loved to communicate that way, where
Yes.
the most interesting things are often the things he's writing to himself,
Yes.
where he plays the part of one of his defense attorneys in like the response that he wants his defense attorney to draft to the state prosecutor Barry Krischer and Lana Belalavich
Hmm.
after a later meeting when they're starting to negotiate plea terms. And it is maybe 1,000 words, 1,500
Hmm.
words. It's maybe
Hmm.
the most number of words I've ever seen come out of an Epstein email.
Yes, that's
And
right.
a lot of that language later ends up in the emails that you see from his lawyers going back to the state and the federal level. And
Right.
so this isn't just somebody who is okaying his defense team's strategy. He is
Yeah.
orchestrating it and he is putting words in their mouth. And so
Yeah.
that's immediately something that was very striking to me. And
I mean,
then
that suggests they actually thought he was smart, and maybe is also the reason that was he consulting about smearing Christine Blasey Ford in the Kavanaugh case, but that he was considered some kind of genius of defense against these kind of charges.
he
And
well, and
yeah.
he was the one who was also doing this scorched earth policy. Feds refer to like Dershowitz and the main lawyer that they dealt with in Palm Beach, Jay Goldberger,
Hmm.
as being folks who were like poisoning the waters and you know and having a scorched earth policy as regards to defense, like to the degree that the feds later talk about how his lawyers belong in jail next to him because of how much they had bent the rules. But you
Right.
can see that this is actually coming from Epstein, as you've seen in a lot of the correspondence and a lot of the recorded testimony. He had a way of pushing people
Right.
very, very hard. And that was absolutely the case with his defense team as well.
Yeah. By the way, I think it's Jay Lefkowitz and not
There's Jay
Jay.
Lefkowitz and Jay Goldberger. They're
Oh,
two
Goldberger
separate
too. Okay.
attorneys. Yeah, they're
Okay.
two separate
Wow.
attorneys.
Okay. Okay.
Lefkowitz is someone associated with Kirkland and Ellis, I
Yes.
believe.
Yep.
And Jay Goldberger is the local Palm Beach defense attorney.
I see. Okay. All right. Good. I'm glad we got that straight. We've got to
Yeah,
get all
right?
the
I mean, there
full
you
rogues
go.
gallery. So the malfeasance on the part of the lawyers is pretty stark. Now, as and you saw some other stuff in the emails
Oh, yes, I
that
did.
really made me shudder.
Okay, they're building an indictment,
Right.
both at the federal level and then there's the stalled state one. Epstein is putting together his defense, and he immediately starts to pressure the feds, and he immediately starts to discredit the witnesses, the potential witnesses. This is before charges are filed, which is really important. So this is where Dershowitz actually goes in and says, "We're going to destroy these girls. If you try to bring these people on the stand, we are going to
Mhm.
destroy them." And it so tainted the waters that this is when Epstein actually hires Jay Goldberger, because Jay Goldberger was an old friend of Barry Krischer. And so it was good cop, bad cop.
Oh, right.
And also, the other part is the prosecutor, Lana Belilovic, at the time, who was working on this case, was perceived to be somebody who wanted to prosecute the case.
Right.
And so Lana Belilovic was actually married to Jay Goldberger's law partner.
Oh,
Guess who had to be recused and taken
right.
off the case? Lana
Right.
Belilovic,
Okay.
right?
And she clearly sounds like the most inflamed about this case. I mean, the most
And yet, as time went on, she stopped responding to the police, to the feds. She sort of closed herself off. It was, these people are no longer returning our calls, et cetera. So that comes a bit later, but that's the lead up to this. So he's already kind of like moved her off to the side by hiring her husband's law partner.
Mhm.
And then we get to where the feds are starting to build their case. And the feds, this is where like it's hard to put together like the total timeline without just getting completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But essentially, because of how aggressive his defense was, they start wearing these federal prosecutors down to the point where they are just sending back every single document. They are making changes to things. They would spend a month going back and forth about a paragraph in something. And
Right.
this was an intentional defense strategy to get them to the point where they were just so exhausted and so
Mhm.
worn down and so demeaned by all of it that they
Mhm.
would just end up accepting whatever they could get. And that is what eventually happened. Because after almost a year, they're negotiating which charges they're going to charge him with.
Right.
And Krischer had taken the unusual step in the state court convening a grand jury, which usually only happens for capital cases, right? The
Yep.
reason was in part because of this defense strategy,
Yeah.
and because they had already discredited these witnesses who were characterized as prostitutes and who were actually berated on stand now that we have the grand jury testimony that was
Mhm.
unsealed. And so the grand jury did come back with, I think, one count of solicitation, and there
Mhm.
was nothing in there about minors, right?
And also
So
trafficking, right? So the like
I don't think
Mhm.
that that was in the
No,
grand
no, no,
jury.
trafficking was considered at least,
Oh,
in
yes.
yeah,
Oh,
and
yes.
they left
Yes,
that out.
yes, and they left it out. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's correct. And
Prostitution is such or yeah, sex work prostitution is such a weird one because then you don't ask about consent anymore because it's meant to be an even exchange. So, you can't have rape if the
and
person gets paid is the idea.
under Florida law until 2016, you
Yeah.
could be a minor and still be charged for prostitution.
Wow. Right.
So, this was something that they exploited
Okay.
in how they painted this case from the defense side,
Yeah.
because these girls took the money, even if they were 14 years old,
Yeah.
they could still become defendants. Now,
Yeah.
would the state have done that? No,
Right.
but it was
Right.
just the like, oh, well, these people are actually like compromised in this way. These children are
Mhm.
compromised in this way, so they don't matter. Their suffering just doesn't especially matter.
Mhm.
And so they did come back with that one indictment, but at the same time, the federal case was moving forward. But every last piece of this is being fought tooth and nail by his defense. And so the federal case eventually goes to the point where they're starting to negotiate a plea agreement,
Mhm.
because it's basically like, okay, you can either go to trial or you can sign a plea agreement where you can plead to federal charges and serve in a federal prison, or you can plead to state charges and register as a sex offender, et cetera, et cetera. So they sort of set up these different options for him.
Mhm.
And even the fact that they were doing this, again, before an indictment had ever been issued and he'd been charged with anything,
Yep.
they're negotiating with him about what charges, right? And trying to find something that they will even accept without these like literally the entire legal profession just descending on them full force, right? They eventually get to a point where they have a plea agreement that he can agree to and he signs it. And then everybody's like, whew,
Right.
we got it.
Yeah.
No, no. That is where the nightmare actually starts. Because even though he had signed it, even though he had negotiated the majority of that agreement, it starts a 9-month process where his law team tries to go above the U.S. Attorney's Office to Washington directly and say, the feds don't actually have any jurisdiction here, and we want to kick it back down to state court only. And this is like, so that is like, it took like that 9-month period for the top DOJ brass to say, actually, the feds, like Acosta does have the jurisdiction to
Mhm.
charge you.
Mhm.
And so during that time period, everybody is so exhausted that they are just like, what? Okay, as long as he just like shows up, as long as he just shows up and actually serves his time, we are okay with whatever.
Mhm.
And so when he actually does finally give up and show up and surrender himself,
Yep.
then it comes time to actually like say how he's going to serve the sentence. And this is where we get into the most explosive part of the thing that I uncovered in the
Yes.
files,
Yes.
which is where the feds had said, okay, we're not going to prosecute you, Epstein, or your network. We're going to sign this non-prosecution agreement in exchange for you pleading to state charges where
Mhm.
you are supposed to serve 18 months in the county jail. You are registering as a sex offender for life, and you are setting up a restitution fund for the victims.
Mhm.
But that is when it goes back to the jurisdiction of Barry Krischer, Lana Belalovic, and the sheriff's office in Palm Beach and the Bureau of Prisons as well. And that's where we start to see some really shady shit go down.
Mhm.
So 8 weeks after he goes to jail, the AUSAs who had again done all of this crazy wrangling for the last year and a half to get him
Mhm.
to plead to this thing, even though, yes, they had given him a non-prosecution agreement, which they should not have done.
Mhm.
One of them sends an email to another one and is like, Epstein is out on work release.
Right.
And one of their colleagues writes back and was like, what the hell is that? What the hell does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
where is he? Like, he's supposed to be in jail this
Yeah.
whole time. We
Yeah.
put that in the plea agreement.
And is that the thing that the victims weren't alerted to? I mean, I know that they weren't kept in the loop, and part of their frustration, and that Julie K. Brown exposed in her, excellent reporting on this, was all the prosecutors were obliged to keep them informed about what was happening, and they didn't know about the sweetheart deal. They didn't know when trafficking was off the table, and they certainly didn't know about the work release.
Right. And so that's where, going back to the indictment, he was never actually indicted before he pled,
Oh,
becomes the
got it.
legal technicality that got them out of the legal requirement. It
Got it.
was illegal, but it was not it was sort of massaging things a little
Okay.
bit under the Crime Victims' Rights Act.
Mhm.
And so, technically speaking, the crime victims are required to be notified at the point that a plea is being negotiated if the defendant has been indicted. But
Oh,
because there was no indictment,
got it.
that is that is what Epstein's defense team wanted and
Mm,
explicitly stated over and over and over again in these documents is like, we don't want you to tell these people, the children, that this negotiation is happening, and they use every kind of excuse, impugning their characters and saying that there would be, people who were filing frivolous lawsuits in civil court and all this stuff. But ultimately, that is what they got.
Right.
That's what they got. Is no, they did not notify the victims, but that a non-prosecution deal had been signed, that a plea agreement had been signed, or certainly not that work release had happened, because and this is what the AUSA has come back to their colleagues after doing some digging on the work release issue, since of course they weren't even notified,
Mhm.
is that, and the prosecutors allege this, I don't know, I couldn't find actual proof that this occurred. They allege that the state, which is Barry Krischer's office,
Right.
actually colluded with Epstein's defense in setting up a framework of how he was to serve his sentence that would have allowed him to get work release and to get the kind of work release that he got, which is essentially he was just out there unsupervised for 12 hours a day,
Mhm.
every day,
Right. Right.
which is
Working.
unheard of.
What's interesting about some of the stuff you found in the emails that goes back to my experience at Edge, the organization of scientists that Epstein sponsored, is that he kind of made up a job for himself, right?
Yes.
And said that he ran a philanthropy for scientists, and that was the pressing work that he had to do on work release. And then the emails pulled that apart. That wasn't.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was fabricated out of whole cloth,
Mhm.
essentially. So, to rewind a bit again, the way that the AUSAs allege that the state attorney's office colluded was that when they filed the indictment finally,
Mhm.
they actually filed an incorrect charge. The charge was filed under a category that allows for work release, even though the category he should have been charged as was one that did not, right?
Right. Got it.
And this was something that the AUSA had been aware of and had actually planned for. In
Hmm.
it, like before the plea was ever signed. This is why they wanted to charge him with that particular category, is so
Right.
he could not get out on work release. But then there was a error, quote unquote, at the state level, right?
Mm. Mhm.
Then the once that was filed, the that jurisdiction was under one judge. That
Mhm.
judge is had jurisdiction over the Palm Beach County Jail,
Mhm.
but which does not have a work release program by default. Somehow,
Mhm.
his lawyer, Jay Goldberger, was able to draft an agreement, which was a post dated agreement
Mhm.
that included language that had been specifically rejected by the feds, that said that the feds were okay with his work release, right? With
Yeah.
him being eligible
Right.
for work
That's right.
release.
Yeah.
When I actually went and I found the original email that they pulled, that, oh, the feds were aware and we're okay with this. It says the opposite. It's coming from the line prosecutor, Marie Villafana, who's basically laying all this out to she had already written a letter to the sheriff's department, who are the ones who get to make the decision about work
Mhm.
release, and
Right.
said, hey, heads up, this guy's going to try to play work release and, like, shirk this and twist it in a way to make it seem like it's totally okay. But, like, we don't think he should be doing this at all. If he tries to apply for this is all the stuff, the shady stuff that he and his lawyers have been doing. We don't
Mhm.
think you should approve it.
Mhm.
But if you feel it is appropriate, we, of course, defer to your jurisdiction.
Right.
That's the line that his lawyers pulled out of that email and put into this predated uh, judicial order
Right.
for somebody to sign. Then somehow his lawyer, Jay Goldberger, was able to go in front of a different judge who just happened to be subbing for the other judge
Mm.
on the day that they were supposed to show up at court,
Right.
and had her sign it.
With the "we defer to your jurisdiction," and then
Right.
had her
With,
sign
like,
it
oh, the feds are
immediately.
aware of this. Everything's fine. Everything's in
Right.
order. Just sign it. Then, so that judge was, her jurisdiction is over the stockade not the county jail.
That's
The
right.
stockade is a minimum security like camp. So it's like, fluffy like Camp Fed, right?
Mhm, mhm,
But at the local level. And so, even though it was drafted in all of these documents that he was supposed to be serving his entire 18 months in the county jail, he
mhm.
served it at the stockade. And because that judge had signed it, and because he went to the stockade, there's a standing order that that judge has over the stockade that says that all of the people who were housed there are eligible for work release if they apply and are approved.
Amazing. I
Yeah.
mean, we're used to swirling kind of Soviet style Joseph K. stories being told, and they usually are at the expense of the defendant, right?
Right.
Like Joseph K. is arrested for a crime he didn't commit, and this was the sort of way that the Soviet system was supposed to smother individuals and
The Gulag
nonconformists.
Archipelago.
Right. Yes, exactly. And right, throw them all in the gulag, but also just all the red tape and all the shenanigans and all the bribes. And you were supposed to understand it as the federal government, or in those cases, totalitarian government, was plucking individuals out and just crushing them.
Mhm.
Instead, we have the reverse here, where the victims are the Joseph K's who are being deprived of justice, like in every way, by a system that serves the oligarchy, that serves Jeffrey Epstein, who was close friends with, he shared a politics with, he shared edge with, say, Alan Dershowitz, this
Mhm.
famous defense lawyer, but also that Alan Dershowitz has been charged with sexual offenses by one of the people who was one of the first people to talk to the state's attorney, right, in the
Mhm.
Virginia Giuffre, the most
Mhm.
famous victim of Epstein of all, who named names, and one of them was Dershowitz. So, like, the 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 same way that in the trial, you start to be like everything's out to get the individual. In this case, everyone seems to be out to rape and pillage and extract from these girls, whose numbers are swelling every day, even then, and are now up to 1,000 or something, more than 1,000. And at the time, there were 100 girls and women who had finally thought they were going to get some justice. And then Dershowitz knew that he and his team would just be able to grind them down, outrun them, make it so they'd be impossible to move. I know that Virginia Giuffre and others said that many of them developed addictions or
Mhm.
other difficulties in that time. So the idea was quite explicitly to destroy these women. So the
That was
machine,
literally those were his words.
he said
Dershowitz's
destroy.
words. He
Yeah,
said, "We will destroy these girls."
right. So if Epstein started, Dershowitz intended to finish the job. It is incredible that any of them survived this level of exploitation and
Yeah.
subjugation and violence at the hands of this oligarchy. Like, that's just what it seems like. It seems like, how else does Epstein get power over people? Maybe there's blackmail. We still don't know exactly how that worked. But also, he's like, must be greasing every palm from Palm Beach to DC
Yes.
to New York and all these corridors. I mean, how do you think
Go
he was
ahead.
able to buy these people off? I just don't know. Like, even when you hear Acosta talk about it, he did do a presser about it, I
Yeah,
think
he
in
did.
2019 or something. He seemed almost confused. Like, he seemed almost like, how did this all happen? Everyone is just being spun around. But I mean, did they just feel like they might, be kneecapped and thrown into the Atlantic Ocean? Or did they feel like, or were they getting money? And how did it all? I still don't and will never understand exactly how Jeffrey Epstein, the man, exerted all this power over so many people.
It's difficult to grasp it, and even going through, and granted, we're seeing, like, it's a little bit of a panopticon, like, you're seeing this from multiple people's point of view in the
Right.
documents at the same time, which makes it even more overwhelming,
Yeah.
but just the, like, number of people that he had to remember to touch base with, the, like, directives that he was issuing to all of these different people at all
Mhm.
times. I mean, if he's talented at anything, it is
Mm.
manipulation at scale. On that same chain where the AUSAs come back to their colleagues and say, "Hey, we've done this digging, and this is," they're the person who wrote it, which the name is redacted, so I don't know who it was, but they said, you know, point blank, they say the state has been in cahoots with the defense to get this done from the get-go. In that chain, there's another reply at the end where AUSA Villafana, the line prosecutor, comes back and replies that the FBI was able to pull from the financial records that they saw that Epstein paid Alan Dershowitz $2.5 million for his involvement in the case. So there's
Right.
at least, you start to draw, of course, like he's greasing every palm,
Right.
but
Right.
he's also, if he, Dershowitz is is in there with him, right? So he's not only
Yeah.
paying these people, these people are also compromised.
Right.
And so
Right.
you start to have to ask, like, what's Jay Goldberger's involvement? Like,
Yeah.
what are all these other people who, I don't know. Maybe they're
Acosta.
just, well, Acosta, I from what I've seen, like, I haven't seen any documents that refer to why he made that decision, and it
Mm,
was his idea.
mm,
Like, Villafana comes out and says, if it had been me, he would get 18 years, like,
mm.
not 18 months. This was
Right.
Acosta's idea. The name is redacted, but you know who it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You do a great job at that. You just, yeah. Yeah.
contextually, it's Acosta's idea.
Right.
So there's so much in there, but it's also like when it comes back to Krischer, this is a really interesting one because Krischer ends up leaving. It's the state attorney is an elected post. He serves his term and he goes back into private practice. And I want to say that was in 2010, 2009. So it's like
Okay.
shortly after,
Yep.
Epstein is in or has served his time. And that's another really interesting exchange because I found an exchange between, again, Goldberger and Epstein from 2010. So this is after Epstein had gotten out of serving his quote unquote jail
Mm.
sentence,
Yes.
his cushy jail sentence. And they are keeping tabs on Krischer still.
Uh,
And Goldberger says to Epstein, hey, Krischer met with the governor before I'm assuming the governor, went to Korea. Did you get any feedback?
mm,
And also, Krischer had lunch with a defense attorney who's a friend of mine. Maybe we should consider using him, meaning the defense attorney who he's friends with, to do your registration stuff, meaning his sex offender registration,
mm.
because that person, the defense attorney, might help us with Krischer. Now, what were they trying to angle for? A pardon.
Right.
They had been trying to angle for a pardon from the actual day that the plea agreement was signed. And we have an email that's from one of the defense attorneys, I don't think it was Goldberger, who sent an email to Epstein and the legal team that said, just for future pardon ammunition, this is what Krischer said when we were signing this deal. He said only the feds can extract a plea deal like this, meaning that he thought, this is again the lawyer's words, he thought it was excessive. He's like, I'm memorializing this moment for future pardon ammunition.
Wow. Wow.
That is the day it was signed.
Right. So we know that when Epstein was on his work release, which I think was 12 hours a day, it was all he did really was sleep
Yes,
back at the
at the stockade.
light stockades where
Mhm.
he had like a whole suite to himself. We know that in that time he resumed his
Abuse.
abuses of girls. What do you think? Why would he even need or want a pardon? Like, no one wants to spend. I get that he didn't want to spend time in prison, but this is so much. Like, did his trafficking operation? Could he not take 1 minute off the job of trafficking girls and moving girls around in the world? And why would he have wanted a pardon so much? This seems to be a long way to go. No one wants to go to prison, but very few people are able to mobilize this much to try to get their record expunged. What do you think?
Pardon, the pardon would have expunged his sex offender status, I
Right,
assume, right?
right.
And so that is just like a key that would open up more doors. I mean, not that he like would any door was ever closed to him, but I
Yeah,
think it is about just a entitlement to do whatever he wanted to. And I think one of the key things for me in watching that Steve Bannon interview that was released as a part of this drop as well is that when Steve Bannon is pressing him about his time in prison or time in the stockade, because that also coincided with the financial crisis, like the kicking off of the financial crisis, which was
Mhm.
led by Bear Stearns. Like the Bear Stearns was the first firm to fall, and that is the firm that Epstein had worked for.
Right.
And so Bannon is sitting there pressing him, saying, "Here you are in this 6 by 9 cell wearing a, brown jumpsuit, and you're
Yeah.
used to spending all day on the phone every day. And here's the firm that you used to work for that's falling into the ground. Like, did you ever stop and think, like, wow, this is insane. How did I let myself get to this place?" And
Right.
you just see Epstein's face is completely blank. And he says, "No,
Yeah.
I thought it was incredible.
Yeah.
The way that think sitting in this house is incredible."
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
that
right.
is, to me, that's like, there is no remorse. There is no acknowledgement of it. This is how I live. And
Yeah.
that is how it is. Like, this
Yeah.
has nothing to do with anybody else. Right.
There's no shame. There's,
No, none.
Bannon, that's, by the way, if listeners haven't watched it, it is really worth watching all the way through, because I have probably said this to you, but supposedly it's like rehearsing a witness. Like, these are like
Mhm.
the questions he might get if he was going to try to redeem himself.
Right.
But I think Bannon loathes Epstein. QAnon hasn't fully formed yet, but he's asking him questions like, "Are you the devil?" He's asking him questions about the Trilateral Commission, which is like a big shibboleth for, like,
Right wing
populist
conspiracy theories.
conspiracy
Yeah.
theorists like Bannon. He keeps flattering him as, "You were always the smartest guy
Yes.
in the room. I'm just a
You're a
traitor."
mathematician.
Right.
dot,
"I'm
dot,
just an
dot.
old a traitor from a stupid traitor from Goldman. You are a brilliant mathematician who knows everything about finance. So maybe you can explain to me the subprime mortgage crisis." And then, like one time after another, Epstein is like, just can't talk his way or think his way out of a paper bag, and tries to give explanations of things like the Pythagorean theorem and just doesn't quite nail it. And that's just the beginning. I mean, his description of the subprime mortgage crisis is like a child could do better. But anyway, it doesn't really matter, because that's how Bannon lands on asking him, "Are you the devil?" And Epstein just starts to joke about it. He says, "I've got a good mirror." I think he
Yeah.
means, "Bannon, you're the devil." And maybe, "I've got a good mirror." Maybe he means, "Bannon, you're the devil." And then
I don't really know what he means by that. It's a very cryptic statement.
there's another moment that suggests he wants to turn everything on Bannon, but this is getting too in the weeds of that thing. But the truth is, you just see how it's impossible for him to reflect on anything.
No, he cannot, which is also why, not to be conspiratorial, but after, like, going through all of these documents and specifically to do with how he handled this situation and watching that interview, I don't think he killed himself.
Interesting. This is a little like the lab leak hypothesis to me, the kid, did Epstein kill himself thing.
Psychologically, though, if
Mhm.
you just, it's more that. It's like, maybe he did, but, like,
That's it. And
this
also,
is not,
yeah,
it does not track with how, like, because he had only been in detention at that point for a few days, I think. Like,
yeah,
and if you look at how he was reacting the first time
right.
to, like, all of this stuff, like, he was just getting started. Like,
Yeah, yeah, he
that
was, like, with lawyers.
machinery.
Right.
Yeah,
He was with lawyers all the time, right? And it looks like, I think someone else has said that. I think possibly Julie Brown has also said still had a lot of runway, even
a
though it looks
lot
like
of
he was
runway.
licked, but he might not have been licked. I mean, let's just go with, because I don't know why the Epstein killing or not killing himself.
Yeah, that was just a
Like,
sidebar.
the problem is you get too far down with that
I know.
hyaloid bone and the "was there a garrote" and stuff, and that's a place I just don't wanna hang out, is in the
Yeah,
hyaloid bone of Jeffrey Epstein. Anything that
yeah.
has taken me there cannot have been good. But I will say the Epstein story did not kill itself. The Epstein prosecution did not kill itself. So someone took pains to defang the prosecution entirely, and to bury the story, and to bury the involvement of all these people in it. And
Yeah, there was not a single
yeah,
person in one way or another that was involved with that first case that it did not materially affect their life.
You mean Alex Acosta then becoming Secretary of Labor? Or you mean
No,
for
I mean, like, from the top all the way down to the bottom line prosecutors or even the lead detective or anybody else, it negatively affected every single one of them.
right,
And
right.
sometimes to the point where they ended up leaving their jobs, sometimes, I mean, it changed people's life and
Mhm,
not in a good way.
mhm.
And even at the time, right around the time the plea agreement was signed initially, and then they were battling about him actually serving
Yeah,
the sentence, the entire leadership that was like under the Acosta level, but was like in between him and the line prosecutors
mhm.
resigned. There were 3 of them.
It's amazing how why people would give so much blood for Jeffrey Epstein. It's the same question we always have with Trump. I am Mike Pence. I am a Christian, important Christian man or whatever. Yes, I will do anything you say, overlord, master, twice divorced and thrice married and all the affairs. And suddenly just any set of principles is gone. And
Well, it's
people
what
like
they
that.
said about Steve Jobs, right? That he had a reality distortion field,
I
and that if
always
you
think about that.
entered the
Yeah.
reality distortion field, then, and that's kind of what, to get into the theory side of this, like that's what why I made a reference, or I'm about to publish a video essay on this as soon as I can finish it. It'll probably be like 3 or 4 more days, but where I reference Carl Schmitt, who is again the Nazi political philosopher who a lot of these like populist folks draw from. But
Mhm.
one of the most like striking concepts that Carl Schmitt has, in my opinion, is what he called the zone of exception or the rule of exception, where his quote is, "Sovereign is he who makes the exception," right?
Mm,
And that
mhm.
means that the person who can shift the rules to whatever they need is the
Uh,
person with the real power. And I
mhm.
think what this shows, and this is just like a forensic accounting, like a vivisection of that principle on the other side of that line of like
Mhm.
who is inside the zone of exception. Just like you said, like there's a like a simulation of justice going on here, but
Yeah.
it is not what we would think of as our familiar legal system. And we
Yes.
see it a lot from the other side, where we see a lot of folks who get completely buried by the legal system and done wrong by the legal system. And of course, people of color, indigenous people, women, all of these groups who are consistently not given the same concept of justice as other folks, but we don't get to see inside of the folks who are really like having the system bent to them very often.
That's right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
this is that view. This shows you like how a zone of exception is constructed for
Yes.
somebody who has the ability to bend reality to their will.
I remember, early in Trump's first presidency, I was coming to understand how important Roy Cohn had been to Donald Trump and how important these lawyer fixer figures were. And I told Dahlia Lithwick, who writes about the Supreme Court, that I just didn't quite understand what these defense attorneys, like, what were their regular life like? And later, when I heard Michael Cohen's testimony before Congress, and certainly when I heard from Dahlia, I started to get it, which is they're not defending someone who has or hasn't committed crimes. They're seeking out white space for either what they can get away with taxes, or what they or it's prophylactic defenses or something. It's like the whole memorialize this so that we can later get a pardon, or I'm going to scout out territory that's ahead of where anyone will
Yeah,
come in the
they're playing it
prosecution.
like a chess game.
They're playing it like a chess game. Okay, I'm glad you said chess because there's something I wanted to talk to you about for a while, and it has to do with this and chess. So I used to think this about Trump, and now I think it even more about Epstein, which is I one time assigned a story at Harper's about the differences between park chess and tournament chess. Park chess
Mm,
being,
mhm,
the players who play like very timed,
mhm,
fast, lean forward, aggressive chess in parks, usually, sometimes homeless,
mhm,
often black. And the first ever park winner had become a grandmaster in tournament chess. That was the occasion for
mm.
writing the piece. So trying to understand why it had taken so long, because if you've ever tried to play with a guy in a park, they're good.
Yeah, forget it.
It's impossible to beat them, right? There are ways that chess is not entirely just a test of your rational, cold, perfect brain, even though it's used as a proxy for that a lot. Park chess just leans into the completely aggressive destabilizing. All you do is emotionally destabilize your opponent so he makes mistakes. You just force errors all the time. And a tournament chess player who can like keep the clock on his side, who is has sang-froid, who like regulates his parasympathetic nervous system, who makes time for himself to think, and who really knows the rules, can always beat the other guy. But it's surprising how few people there are in that first category who
Mm,
really, like I used to think maybe Robert Mueller was that, who really
mm.
rest into the systems of the law, or Jack Smith when he talks, or sometimes Andrew Weissman when they talk. You sort of are like, they just think the law is this way, it works this way. No, this can't work this way. But then you have Jeffrey Epstein. How is he getting this kind of defense? He's like, knows Dershowitz is good at pyrotechnics, but one of them is good at like finding his way through the system. But then how does he bully them into doing this stuff for him? I mean, money can only go so far. And the way that money changes hands in this is traceable in some cases, at least some cases. And it is terrible for prosecutors to take bribes from the defense. I mean, I realized that it was like career ruining for them, but I mean, jailable offenses, disbarring offenses must have been
Well,
committed at some
and
point, or
they
he just bullied them into doing it like like a park chess player, which is like, say everything you want, but I'm just going to yell at you like he does
yes.
in emails.
Yeah. Essentially, he was using these people, and I'm sure he has done this elsewhere because even in there's an side here where there were 3 accomplices, right, that they were trying to also investigate and indict
Mhm,
along with Epstein. So there were 3 people who were his co-conspirators, his accomplices. 2 of those people were Leslie Groff and Sarah Kellen,
mhm,
who were his assistants. The
mhm.
3rd person, I was not able to find an unredacted document that mentioned who that was. But
I
the
think that it's Nadia Marchenko. I think that
it
it's the
might have
so-called
been
core 4, or at least some of the core 4. The 4 sort of early on, they were probably victims, and then they were converted into accomplices who then got other women, and they were unnamed. Epstein did not give them up. He must have made that promise and stuck to it. I think that's
that was the non-prosecution agreement
right,
was essentially for them, but I just couldn't find Nadia Marcinkova as, like, the unredacted 3rd person, but
right.
Sarah
Yep,
Kellen and Leslie Groff were going to be indicted. And
got it.
one of the things that the AUSAs talk about
Mhm,
is that the FBI showed up to Leslie Groff's house
mhm,
and served her with a grand jury subpoena, and she excused herself from the room to say that she had to go check on her sleeping child. Whose child is that? And then when she was upstairs, she called Epstein while Epstein was in the air. He turned his plane around and went to a different jurisdiction so that they could not serve him. And he told her while she was on the phone with him, while they were
mhm,
downstairs, to resist the subpoena and to shut the fuck up and don't say a word. And so he had already started, and they talk about how aggressive he was to her.
mhm,
And that, in fact, one of the charges they were thinking of giving him was simple battery, that he had apparently hit her when they were on in the plane at an earlier time. And she refused to collaborate with that.
wow.
So there are all of these things where he uses people as puppets and
Yep,
sort of like this is also what he's doing with the defense team, where he is clearly coming up with the most aggressive
mhm,
strategy, the words that they should say. He uses the term Kafkaesque actually
hmm,
to describe something, and then later that shows up in Alan Dershowitz's memo to Barry
hmm.
Krischer. So there's
Okay.
just
Maybe I wanna keep this, some of this true for English majors, but or maybe, Russian major studies majors, but, it does seem to be worth thinking about Kafka a little bit more, and, that's amazing that, of course, you use that expression. This is sort of a maybe underbaked, but like a very fully formed in my head idea about the response of the men in the Epstein files, or the Epstein class, to fascism in Europe and to the totalitarian communist government, Soviet Union. I think that where many of us read the rise of fascists in Europe as, and the thing we took away from is that there was cruelty involved in that. And the consequences of that for the people dead in the Holocaust were the things that made it most horrible and striking and the reason we pledge never again. But I think there were a lot of people in the Epstein files, and you can see this in their philosophical conversations, and a lot of people in the Edge group who saw the most salient feature of the Nazi regime say as that it was repressive
Mm.
and that not cruel but repressive, so that it like kept people down by keeping them in line by having speech codes and all that stuff, and that they carried over into thinking about Soviet Union. So Stalin is not so much cruel as he is the person who constrains the individual from speech,
Mhm.
from dissent, but also from full self-actualization. And then you get an Ayn Rand, then you get the Ayn Rand
Exactly. I was gonna use you gotta yeah,
right?
objectivism.
But so what's crazy there is that if we're not paying enough attention to the cruelty of Stalin and Hitler, who like are these kind of cartoonish placeholders for what we think it can go wrong in history, but if we don't see them as their boots were on the throats of actual human people and bodies that ended up dead, tortured, mutilated, raped, if we don't see it that way, if we instead see them as like enacting something much more abstract, like the repression of the individual, then you get a defendant side regime so that the guy that rapes girls is the person whose rights you're most worried about, is the person whose expression you're most worried about, is the person whom everyone has to be mobilized to protect. I should have known that he would think of himself as Joseph K. I mean, Joseph K
Well,
is
yeah, it's the same way that Elon Musk thinks that he's siding with the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. Like, "I'm the
right.
rebel. What are you talking about?
That's
I'm not
right.
the Empire."
That's right. Because I think that they missed that the major takeaway is the violence, right? So it's like the victims in this thing are victims of violence. Then suddenly, and Noam Chomsky does this in his conversation with Epstein, they see themselves as the victims of some like murderous, bloodthirsty feminist bitches and like they're toadies in the deep state or however they see it, and that they are like caught in this trap because repression is the worst thing that a government or a system can do to them. And I think the victims of Jeffrey Epstein would like a word, as they say. There is something worse than repressing your libidinous desires and your desires to make a ton of money that a government can do to you. And one thing it can do is collude with your rapist. What happened to them is so unspeakable, and it is like just a stain on so many of our institutions that they were just treated that way. I'm so amazed at how many of them are still standing and how many like live to tell the tale. And Virginia Roberts not being among them. I mean, if we were wondering about which suicide was sketchy, I would say that the suicides of some of his Epstein's victims, of his Confederate Jean-Luc Brunel's
Brunel.
victims, and then maybe even Virginia Roberts, who had a lot to live for. She finally saw her abuser dead. She finally saw Ghislaine behind bars. She'd fought a long time and survived a lot. I don't know about Epstein, but I wish people. It was a very weird suicide too. But in
Yeah, it
any
was.
case, the people whose fates I do care most about are the victims. Some of them who speak out on TikTok are really important to listen to, not because we believe their stories. Of course, we believe their stories, but because they saw this machine operating up close. They knew that that prosecution was hinky before anyone did.
Well, it's
When
funny too because there's another email that is from, again, somebody, I think it's somebody in the FBI emailing an AUSA, and they say the FBI agent says, "Vanity Fair has been sniffing around again. They have a reporter who is a ex-federal somebody who says that, quote, 'The state has been bought off. What should I do about it?'" You
it's
know?
amazing. It's
Mhm.
amazing. Now, do you think I mean, I guess we can drop off this way, but that what an incredible discovery in the files and just putting together the pieces. It is like a puzzle with pieces missing, and it looks like a redacted document when you try to
It
figure when
does.
you try to figure this stuff out. It is like stuff that you have to go down all these roads. But the reason that it's important is because so much mystification has gone on of the people by the
Yes.
Epstein class, of the victims by the Epstein class. And so staying unmystified is almost a duty of citizenship right now.
Yeah, and I
And
sort of I call it like, we're in like an ontological fog machine right now. Like
that's right.
the system is produces so much fog that it can't even see itself anymore.
Yeah.
And so this is the information, like it is a problem to be fixed, but it's also just like right now we have the information and we can start to see more clearly as a result of that. We don't usually get to see inside of this side of things. We're getting
Yes.
to see it now. And
Yeah.
so now it still remains what we're going to do with that information, but we have it now. And that's incredibly important.
Yeah, no more abstractions about how power works. Like we really are starting to be able to see that. I've said this before. I think the Epstein files, in a way, represent a strange gift because they are very, very disturbing. But Foucault is a mess, so I hate to invoke him, but it's important to see these things in action, to see exactly what's going on so that we're not deceived. And some of us, like you, are brave enough to wade into some parts of this. And it's been amazing to see people ungaslight themselves. So it's that response of, I knew it. I knew this was weird. Finally, people are really taking apart Victoria's Secret physical standards. If they were put out in the world by Leslie Wexner colluding with Epstein as a pedophile, that's something that we kind of knew. It's something we kind of knew. And then you see it out there on paper. And the modeling profession falling apart right and left, America's Next Top Model being exposed. These things, you pull the threads and the scales fall from our eyes, and that is always a good thing. That's always a good thing in a democracy for us to know what's up.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for
agree.
helping us learn better what is up. And it doesn't look good, but it still is better to know than not know.
It is. And, I'll keep playing the hits, you know?
Keep playing this. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Till next time. Thank you. It's so good to hear this all spelled out with such clarity.
Thank you.
That's it for today's show. This episode of What Rough Beast was brought to you by me, Virginia Heffernan, and Cy Cantarell. It was produced by Richard Stanislaw and Brianna Snyder, and John Jeremiah Sullivan recorded our theme song, Je dis ce que je pense et je vis comme je veux, which was originally written and recorded by the French pop star Antoine. You can subscribe to the show at whatroughbeastpod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Virginia Heffernan on behalf of Cy Cantarell and the What Rough Beast team. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time on What Rough Beast. Whoa. Oh my God. It's so bad.
Sorry, I did the total autistic, like, data fire hose dump.